So right now we're going to go ahead and talk about investment and why it is considered somewhat unstable, especially in comparison to consumption. One key part of that is durability. Okay, capital has a long lifespan, so once it's built, there's no immediate need for further investment. You have irregularity of innovation. Innovation does not proceed in a smooth linear fashion. Instead, you'll see time periods, if you study US history or various other countries' histories, where there are bursts of innovation followed by periods of relative stability in innovation and technology. You have the variability of profit. So profit is subject to the forces of competition, cyclical changes in the economy, human management decisions. Those times when you have variation of profits will create a variation in the amount of gross private investment. And you have variability of expectations. So political, social, natural phenomena shape our positive and negative expectations of the future. Remember John Maynard Keynes' animal spirits. That kind of stuff can change the amount of investment. So with investment, you don't have to do it. So when you do, when an economy does invest, you will generally see a decent change in aggregate demand and gross private investment there. Gross private investment is definitely going to be less consistent than consumption. So many economists believe that it is investment instability that is the chief cause of the business cycle. So when you see investment happening in an economy, you have the change in GDP that's going to be a boom. And when you don't have that investment, you are going to be in a contraction. So going back to the business cycle there that you guys have already covered. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and link two graphs that we have already learned, loanable funds and investment demand. And we're going to look at something called crowding out. All right, so what we're going to look at is the effect of an expansionary fiscal policy on loanable funds and investment. So an expansionary fiscal policy is when in America you would have the federal government taxing less and spending more money in order to encourage growth in aggregate demand. Now, with an expansionary fiscal policy, because you're taxing less and you are spending more money, generally what will happen is it will drive up the amount of debt that the US government has. So with this expansionary fiscal policy, what's going to happen is the government's going to be borrowing to spend. And that is going to have an effect on the loanable funds market, and it's going to have an effect on the investment demand market. And we're going to see what happens to gross private investment when the government is borrowing to spend. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a loanable funds market right next to an investment demand market graph. So remember with our loanable funds, we have our real interest rate on our y-axis, quarterly loanable funds on our x-axis. For our investment demand, we have our real interest rate on our y-axis, we have our gross private investment on our x-axis. We have our supply of loanable funds, we have our demand for loanable funds, we have our investment demand. So these graphs are right next to each other. You're going to link them. The reason you can link them is because they both have the real interest rate on your y-axis. So now we're going to have at our initial equilibrium on our loanable funds, we are going to have an initial equilibrium real interest rate and quantity of loanable funds. Now we're going to go ahead and go all the way over from our loanable funds, and we're going to go ahead and hit our investment demand curve. And we can see at that real interest rate, we have that level of investment. Now, what happens is the government, when doing its expansionary fiscal policy, is going to borrow to spend. Remember, more borrowing is going to increase the demand for loanable funds. So therefore, the demand for loanable funds is going to shift to the right. So our demand for loanable funds shifts to the right from DLF to DLF1. And that is going to change our equilibrium real interest rate here. So our equilibrium real interest rate and quantity of loanable funds both went up. But now after that demand for loanable funds shift, we have a higher real interest rate. We bring that all the way over to our investment demand curve. So we bring that R1 all the way over to our investment demand curve, and we go down, and we can see that our amount of investment dropped from I to I1. So what happened here is that the government spending crowded out gross private investment. You had more government spending, which would help aggregate demand, but that extra government spending increased the real interest rate. That increase in the real interest rate drove down the amount of gross private investment. So that government spending was good for the economy, but it drove out the gross private investment, which is bad. So ultimately, is that expansionary fiscal policy going to be a good thing for aggregate demand, for gross domestic product? That is a subject of much debate. But nevertheless, crowding out is something that economists always do take seriously. So as a quick review, if we have an increase in government spending, or we have a decrease in taxes, the government is now going to be deficit spending. It is borrowing to spend. That's going to shift the demand for loanable funds to the right. That pushes up the real interest rate. And that is going to drop your level of gross private investment. And that is called the crowding out effect. That government spending crowded out gross private investment. Okay. Let's go on to our assessment here. So for number one, we're going to graph and explain what would happen to the investment demand curve. There is an increase in technology. So go ahead and draw our original investment demand curve and shift it to the left or to the right and give you the determinant. And for number two, we're going to graph and explain what would happen to the investment demand curve if there is an increase in the cost of production. So once again, we graph our original investment demand curve, shift it to the left, shift it to the right. Tell me our determinant. All right, so if you need more time, you can go ahead and pause here and finish this up. And for the summary in a paragraph, describe what you learned today. And I'll check these tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.